Welcome. Welcome to Poetry Flash in Berkeley, California. I'm Joyce Jenkins. Today we are so grateful to present the profound work of two poets, Diane Seuss and Jennifer Franklin. Their new books can be purchased at bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash. The link is in the chat box. Please do check out these amazing, amazing books. To the best of our tech ability, you were muted on entry. Please stay muted. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the Poetry Flash YouTube channel and Facebook page. When the program ends, unmute yourself and we'll keep the Zoom on. So those who are with us live, in the audience live, can ask a question or say hello, just for a few minutes. Visit poetryflash.org to check out our interviews, reviews, poems, and more, and to see news about literary events in California. To receive emails about upcoming Poetry Flash readings, both in person and online, join our mailing list at poetryflash.org. So now to introduce Jennifer Franklin. Her new 4-way books poetry collection, which I'll hold up here, you probably won't be able to see it, but maybe, is If Some God Shakes Your House. Edward Hirsch says, Jennifer Franklin throws her voice in these taunt lyrics and prose poems that view her own experience through a dramatic lens. The voice of Antigone come back to face the rockiness of our moment and the inevitability of death. The serious, unremitting book will leave you shaken by the furies, the randomness of destiny, and the gravity of life. Her previous books include No Small Gift and Looming. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart and has appeared in American Poetry Review, Los Angeles Review, Prairie Schooner, the Paris Review, and elsewhere. She teaches at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, where she runs the reading series and serves as program director. And she's also taught in Manhattanville's MFA program in New York. I was deeply moved by these poems and can't wait to hear them. Let's give a warm jazz hands welcome to Jennifer Franklin.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to everyone at Poetry Flash and for having the Zoom reading for us. We just heard that you haven't had a Zoom reading since February. Thank you so much, Diane, for reading with me today and for the blurb that you wrote for my book. It means everything. Thank you to all my students and friends who are here. I know so many of you have heard a lot of these poems many times. So thank you for being here again to celebrate me reading with Diane Seuss. So this is my book, If Some God Shakes Your House. The title is taken from Anne Carson's translation of Antigone. And the quote is, if some God shakes your house, ruin arrives, ruin does not leave. And I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, As Antigone. As Antigone, I'm not greedy. I will go when I'm led from the city to the tomb. I don't want glory. They have never understood me. It's not a death wish that made me tend to you, my love, even though I knew nothing could save you. I couldn't let go. Our legs side by side as we slept, the flowers you lined up in the soil after I picked them, how you wouldn't accept they were dead, that planting them again would not let them bloom. February. Our long coats are all that separate us from the cold. Halfway around the world, the sky opens to put out wildfires over the carcasses of burned marsupials. We wait for the subway, for the train. My daughter waits for her short yellow bus that arrives each morning with one sobbing boy. Politicians preen and posture. The air is damp with acquittal. We bend our heads, but not in prayer. Our palms hold small, backlit tablets that promise information or escape. Miles north, a student paints a swastika in my old dorm. Another student covers it with a star. Only the dog is calm, sleeping in a circle in her clean fleece bed. Orwell wrote, "There was truth and there was untruth. And if you clung to the truth even against the whole world, you were not mad." I try to put my daughter to sleep on time in her new room. As I read the familiar incantations, flowers climb up the lamp to the ceiling. All the animals have escaped the zoo. I want the story to end there, all of them tucked into the corners of the zookeeper's room, breathing their heavy eucalyptus breath across the night, their fur shining in the moonlight through the blinds. As Antigone, I am tired of everyone telling me what to do. For as long as I can remember, my mother told me how I should feel, what to eat, who to date, what clothes looked good and bad on my shape, which colors I could pile in front of stunned cashiers. During the first hurricane, she said I would die if I didn't listen to her orders. I grew up confusing opinion with oracle. She reminded me all men are dangerous each time I left the house alone. Even after I moved 4 states away for college, she sent me newspaper clippings, warnings in the mail. She believed I was safely married to a surgery resident and drove 5 hours to sit by my hospital bed and watch as IV fluids hydrated me. That winter, I wanted to end my pregnancy. After losing 33 pounds in 7 weeks, she joined my husband's campaign to keep me sick and expecting. I visit a friend I haven't seen in years and confide how afraid I am for my disabled daughter when I'm dead. Her husband tells me my daughter is happy and oblivious, and she wouldn't know if she were being raped, as if she has less sentience than a dog chained to a pole in an overgrown yard. As Antigone, if you think I wasn't angry at his betrayal, you're wrong. Fury moved through my body with the gravity of a waterfall. I cut my ankles under my dress where no one would see. I snuck out of my room at 3 a.m. wearing ripped night clothes under my winter coat, not knowing what I would tell my brother of this ruin. Once I discovered home was a lie I told myself, I shoveled the dirt to bury my life. The moon watched without judgment, knowing nothing ever changes except the clothes men wear while they wound. Your light through the branches shines like a paper lantern. October. I try to keep the image of the sunset over the lighthouse at the edge of the Cape, but the tornadoes we drove away from on our way home erase it from my mind. We never reached the lighthouse. The white-headed dog got sunstroke and collapsed in the sand. We hitched a ride back to the bed and breakfast. I hold the few people I love in my fist like the wooden tulips I bought myself one Mother's Day. News inserts itself into my sleep. The faces of judges who should not judge, children still in cages. I used to read incredulous about the crimes of the past. Now that we have our own concentration camps and ghettos, I am finished with history. Sontag wrote, "Someone who is permanently surprised that depravity exists when confronted with evidence of what humans are capable of inflicting in the way of gruesome hands-on cruelties upon other humans has not reached moral or psychological adulthood." One fall not long ago, I grew up. The pumpkins piled in cardboard boxes pitied me as I walked past. I no longer hold my tongue like the good girl I was taught to be, hair brushed and braided. The waves beat the whale-watching boat and returned me to the months I was pregnant and told not to end it by my husband, by my mother. A woman has voted against all women, and the Supreme Court is lost. I am safe on the cold beach, picking shells. Every child on the sand knows this dilemma. The shells look perfect, cradled in the wet sand before you bend and hold them, to find each dull and dry in your hands. I stash a few in a tin with a watercolor of the lighthouse on the lid. I memorize the one I found, so I know which is mine. As Antigone, when I understood that you couldn't be saved, all I had left was the ability to be good, to be right, envied by everyone who didn't have my courage or conviction. I wasn't brave. All I could do was curl up next to your mute body and burrow my face under your lifeless arm. I needed some way to quiet your terrible voice. Crayon creates his own truth. It took me years to see the chaos he wanted to create. He brought blight to the roses and cut them back to claim the cure. All summer, he set small fires with words, but kept his hands clean. He turned us against each other as if we were all invasive species in his groomed garden. As we sat under the golden rain tree, I worried the sliver of moon would incur his wrath for its imperfection. Fear is an addictive drug. When he fits his tight fist around my throat now, I hear his lies as lies. My crime is thinking for myself. Hannah Arendt believed forgiveness is the key to freedom. I cannot agree. And the chorus says, "You are not wrong about the leader. He lives for performance and propaganda. Memes, mockery, morality will not thwart him." As Antigone, I'm all done being nice. It hasn't gotten me anywhere. Since I was young, I gave everything away: milk money, homework, adoration. Everyone wanted to make me into a small version of herself, teaching me weaving, writing, wiles. All I wanted was love. Picked a bouquet of dandelions and handed it to my mother. When she turned her mouth into a little O and called the tight yellow suns weeds, my body became a weight I wanted to let go. I thought of all the lessons I memorized to keep me still, all the colors I couldn't wear because they clashed with my red hair, all the rules of modesty so men would not look at me with hunger. The only thing I owned was a jar I was given, like Pandora, as a girl. Before I unlatched the lid, I had already lost everything: faith, health, my child. I refused to watch what flew out, but something hard as lapis, real as want, wrenched my wrist right back, so hope remained, writhing alone at the bottom of the jar, like dirty water after dead tulips are discarded, yellow stamens dropping pollen to the floor. Silent, it watched me for years, months at a time. I forgot it was there. But when it's trapped like that, it grows so large, nothing can quell it. No one thanks me for what I have done, but I don't need praise anymore. I turned weeds into flowers. As Antigone, I realize why I love the dead. They are the only ones who cannot betray me. I talk to them without judgment. They have said every cruel thing they will utter, stolen everything they will take, finished fighting their flawed battles. They are as tired as I am, crumpled in the corner of my bed, hiding my eyes under a silver sheet. They are quiet, their closed mouths stitched shut, like the dolls I wanted to smash against my bureau after my mother lined them up around my room. I recite lines to them to prove I'm not alone. Sometimes I hear them echo my words back to me while the moon watches with its rough, cold face. The climate clock says there are 6 years, 153 days, 9 hours, 58 minutes, 8 seconds to rescue the Earth from irrevocable disaster. It's a lot less than that now, because that was in 2020 when I handed in my manuscript. Memento Mori, Keats's Death Mask. Reading this one for Diane. As soon as I saw the white plaster framed on black velvet in a chipped walnut frame, I knew I had to have it. Hang the stark white mold of his beloved young face above my desk to study his ever-closed eyes and the shape of his last living mouth. When I first heard his lines, I swooned with childish envy at the music of his mind, words that would never be erased. I did not yet know he died unsure of his worth, didn't know his friend denied him his hidden morphine that would have erased and eased his inevitable death. I did not yet know how dying feels, how painful and permanent to stare only at a blue ceiling, lungs full of water enough to drown. Memento Mori, Pompeii. In my favorite fresco, a skull hovers over a speckled blue butterfly and wooden wheel, soul versus fortune. Ancient citizens near Vesuvius gazed at the same sunken eye sockets, unprepared for disaster as they drank wine and dined with cutlery top heavy with silver skulls. 2 years ago, I was one of thousands to walk these ruins. Now the poppies of Pompeii are untrampled during our plague. We wait while politicians and scientists decide when we can return outside without endangering ourselves and others. On Hart Island, workers in hazmat suits dig mass graves. According to archaeologists, humankind's most lasting contribution to Earth will be the endless stash of chicken bones we buried in the soft soil. And 2 more poems. Thank you all for being here. As Antigone, I see my hubris. Tulips turn to late winter sky like shelter dogs wanting to go home. I'm waiting, they whisper, while I speak tender words to the dead. Those who cannot speak are most worthy of words. In love with the impossible and certain I am right, I go inside and close the door. I know how to be alone. To be a character in a tragedy, you must be blind to your flaw. I always look at the world from windows. The park, a green canopy, hovers against the blue. In this wind, the unhinged door on the roof across the street opens, bangs shut. The chorus says, "You are nothing more than a lone tulip trying to stand erect in the wild wind." And the last one I'm going to read from the book is the last poem in the book, and then I'm going to read the short sonnet that Diane published on Poem a Day. As Antigone, I still want to believe I can find some way to fix you, that if I go back to the beginning, retrace the disaster with the savant detective's obsession, I could uncover a cure, the smartest expert, some successful drug. Better yet, I want the pediatrician to give you a different diagnosis. I want to go back to the walk home, past restaurants and playgrounds, autumnal light catching all the auburn in your hair. I want to go back to the moment your father left us outside the cafe. Consider handing you to him, all 47 pounds of you in your gingham pants and hot pink cardigan, Dalmatians decorating the little pockets, and walk away without looking back. But I would never have left, and I won't now. One way or another, you will be the end of me, inadvertent brute force, vector of virus, constant caretaking, your heavy body forcing my remission's abrupt end. I know what's waiting, as certain as cloth hung to hold my scarred neck. I will not walk away. The moment the nurse pressed your splotched body into my arms, your needs fixed my fate. Constantly confused, your jagged voice requests Christmas songs all spring. You shove words of grace into my dry throat, and I sing. I don't need pills, white as sleep, to silence me. Every ersatz saint knows endless sacrifice is suicide. For 20 years, I have been disappearing. Touch me. I am not even here. And this one is preparing for residential placement for my disabled daughter. Thank you all so much for listening. My life without you, I have already seen it. Today on the salt marsh, the red-winged blackbird perched in the tallest tree, sage green branches falling over the water. She sat there for a long time, doing nothing. As she lifted up to fly, the slender branch shook from the release of her weight. When the bird departed, it seemed the branch would shake forever in the wind, bobbing up and down. When it finally stopped moving, the branch was diminished, reaching out to the vast sky. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer Franklin. Those poems are beautiful and speak to all of us. Thank you so much. Next, we have Diane Seuss. Her recent book is Frank Sonnets. You will not be able to see this, but this is a taste of the cover. And winner of the Pulitzer Prize 2022, not too shabby. These poems are deeply felt and form a very detailed autobiography. The Pulitzer Committee said, a virtuistic collection that inventively expands the sonnet form to confront the messy contradictions of contemporary America, including the beauty and difficulty of working class life in the Rust Belt. That's the formal version. Terence Hayes said, you will have many new definitions and feeling for the sonnet after reading these amazing poems by Diane Seuss. Every poem is an example of the incomparable Seussian sonnet, where elegy and narrative test the boundaries of the conventional form. Acute, resolute, buoyant, and unflinching, Frank rings loudest as a synonym for candor. So much do these poems feel tethered to a real life a real world, simultaneously grounded and spiritual, verbal and existential, with resonances of the blues. Her previous books are Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl, Four-Legged Girl, Wolf Lake, White Gown Blown Open, and It Blows You Hollow. A new collection, Modern Poetry, that we're really looking forward to is forthcoming from Grey Wolf Press in 2024, and she may share some of that new work with us today. Her writing has appeared in the Georgia Review, the Best American Poetry, everywhere you can think of. Her honors also include the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. She lives in rural Michigan, and originally I'm from Michigan, and I tell you, every page sings to me with memories and images of that place. Let's send up a warm welcome for Diane Seuss.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a lovely introduction. And I'm still kind of reeling from Jennifer's reading. I've read the book, of course, several times, but nothing is like looking into her face and eyes and hearing it in her voice. I've never read a book that so captures the suffering of motherhood when your child is suffering, and the complexity of femaleness. I'm shattered and struck and moved, and I learned so much from your work. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank Joyce too for letting me be part of this. And thank you for the tech support out there. And thank you to Poetry Flash. Well, I thought I would read a few of the sonnets from Frank Sonnets, and then I'll turn to some poems in my forthcoming book, Modern Poetry, that all feature the romantic poet Keats. So this is from Frank. Sometimes I can't feel it, what some call beauty. I can see it, I swear. The conifers and fat bees, ferns like church fans, and then the sea, its flatness as if pressed by stones like witches were. The dark sand ridged by tides, strewn with body parts, claws, the stranded mesoglea of the moon jellyfish, transparent blob, brainless, enlightened in its clarity. I stand there, I walk the shore at low tide, the sky fearless, not open to me, just open. There it is, the wind, cold, surfs boom, drowning out thought. I can photograph it, I can name it beautiful, but feel it, I don't know that I am feeling it. When I drown in it, maybe then. This turns to childhood. I don't think I've read this one out loud since Frank came out. My first crush was Wild Bill Hickok, not the actual guy, but the guy who portrayed him on TV, Guy Madison, who died of emphysema, whose grandson was killed in action in Iraq. What did cowboys do all day, I wondered, aside from gunfighting, figuring out whether they'd be good or bad, which determined the color of the hat. My hat. How did my mother afford it? Bought at West's Variety, powder blue. My gun, a toy. I was wise enough at age 3 to own my projections. I would become what I loved. My mother didn't hover as I decided what I'd do with what I was. Her best friend made a particle board lid for the crib so she could go out on the cement slab and drink highballs unimpeded by kids who all turned out fine and loved her madly, though half of them died in motorcycle wrecks. My mother didn't care if I rescued or killed or swung from a noose until I was dead. That was my domain. Her domain was TV dinners and James Joyce. Mickle's first crush was the body of a young, hung TV cowboy who swung from the noose in a spiral pattern. Mickle called home his projections and likewise died young and hung. I decided my kind of cowboy would read tall tales from a tall book called Tall Tales about tornadoes and card games and white whales. This is sort of a adolescence era sonnet. That bar, world of the satisfying place, cream-colored sign with bullet holes in the back end of Villeneuve's gold Lincoln. He was still getting residuals from his stint as the keyboardist for the Shondells, died young of hep C. That was a cold blow. I fed him pickles from a jar in his car and bled on the seat. State Line Supermarket burned. I sat on an upended crate and ate pickles hot from the fire with the owner's daughter. She was giddy as people get when their lives go up in smoke. Her big eyes gleamed like they did when she played Maria in The Sound of Music. I was Gretel, a thrill, though knocked unconscious by Friedrich during the thunderstorm scene. Drive-in movie screen burned. I stood and watched, sleeveless undershirt, hands on my hips. Tragic spectacle, my realm, I its ruthless queen. Elvis died hard that day, burned alive on a Ferris wheel with a smile on his face. My first thrill at the hands of another was when twins sat on the small of my back and gave me a back rub. This was before the white Jesus kids got to her, made her quit dancing, eating cheeseburgers, snapped her glasses in half and said, if God wanted her to see, he'd heal her eyes. Her hands were strong, fingers long. I didn't have a word for that baroque pleasure, but I knew better than to thank her. Once I took a Greyhound North across an icy bridge. It seemed it took all night to cross that bridge, a bridge lined with stars, unscrewed from the sky and fastened to the cables and the towers with black electrical tape. Bus windows fogged over from all the human breathing, lovers, masturbators, numb frostbit moon going black around the edges. So many stops along the way, boarded up gas stations and stores, caution light swinging, butchered deer hanging head down from maple branches, crust of ice on blue snow, radiant. some hollow-eyed chump embarking from or disembarking into God-forsaken loneliness, which I had come to love, not the lonely ones, but loneliness itself. When I reached my stop on Highway 2 outside Jack's, wild blueberry pie, but closed, driver opened the hatch and told me to crawl into the belly of the bus to retrieve my bag. Exhaust lit red when it pulled away. Walked far that night, then through hip-deep snow to the shack. No heat but wood, Faulkner, and a feather bed. This will be the last of the poems from Frank, and it takes place when I fell and broke myself. Changed my life. I fell on an incline, talus, tibia, fibula, calcaneal tendon mangled, red circuits ruptured, body facing east toward a little town named Climax, and then New York, where I once danced in a circle of girls at Kev's sister's wedding. Broom, shattered glass, Kev in his parents' bathroom, pilfering benzos from the medicine chest. And now his grave, lonely in sunlight in Sag Harbor. My leg twisted west toward the late sunset San Francisco, where Mikko, covered in KS lesions with his last $50, took me in a cab to see the conservatory of flowers. Actually, only the zinnias. Just look, he said, a yellow that made my eyes ache. But nothing thus far compares to bone pain except childbirth. Put a bullet, I begged my ex-husband in the 48th hour of labor, right here, pointing to my temple. Leg inert in a black cast for months, dead grandma's wheelchair, son by then a junkie, blank and mean. I crawled to the cold road, pleading for help. Humbled yet, Queen? Okay, so hopefully Keats will be kinder to us. So I'll start with a poem called Romantic Poetry. Now that the TV is gone and the music has been hauled away, it's just me here and the muffling silence a spider wraps around a living morsel. And at times, often the unbearable. I bear it though, just like you. Long ago, I bore a suitcase filled with books, bore it far on city streets. To sell, I guess, at some used books place, one of those doorways down steps into dankness and darkness. The scent of mildewed, dog-eared, fingered pages, the suitcase, big and square and sharp-cornered, covered in snakeskin, bought at Goodwill for $1, knowing I had some traveling to do, some lugging, and I was right. What books I sold, I do not know. Maybe that's where modern poetry went. The cover cherry red and blossom white. I can see its spine in my mind's eye, pointing downward beneath the dank and the dark to the water tunneling under the city and making its way to the river. Poems sliding down the book spine into water, the shock of the cold and dank, down where my uterine lining, my blood and cast off ovulations, cast off fetal tissue swims below the city. The micro dead ride modern poems like swan boats in the park, from the park to the river to the sea. I'm thinking now of PJ Harvey and Nick Cave, balladeers, lovers, Vita and Virginia, Frank O'Hara and Vincent Warren. Somehow we ride our lost loves out to sea, or they ride us. It doesn't matter. Poet or poem or reader, the same ectoplasm. The modern in time becomes antique, and the stone faces of the dead convert to symbols ripe for smashing. Come to think of it, symbols are terrible. As the tyrant shouted to the masses, part of his brainwashing campaign, I know it and you know it too. I was 23 when I sold off modern poetry and sailed to Italy seeking romantic poetry, which was at one time modern, and found my way to Rome and Keats' death room. His deathbed, a facsimile. Everything he touched was burned to kill what killed him. I lifted his death mask from its nail, cradled it, closed my eyes and kissed his lips until the plaster warmed and stained his face with the lipstick on my lips, red as the cover of modern poetry. The color of the droplets of arterial blood he coughed onto his sheets and viewed by candlelight. Then he knew he was done for. His death warrant, he called it. After those many kisses over his face and eyes and the reticulated eyelashes, cold and tangled, my lips were blossom white, my face chalked, like I'd caught something from him. And I don't just mean consumption, though my lungs burned for years. They still burn. This is the danger of the ecstasy of kissing the dead or dying poet on the mouth. The disease you'll catch, well, it changes you. The tingle in the spine, the erotic charge will be forever married to poetry's previous incarnations. It's why marriage itself never worked for me. I kept wanting to get to the part where death parts us and I could find myself again. Keats made such a compact corpse, only 5 feet tall, shorter than Prince, and intricately made. Always he was working it out. The meaning of suffering, the world's his own, the encounter with beauty, nearly synonymous with suffering, how empathy could extinguish him and he could set down the suitcase at last, or finally deliver him to himself, distinct as the waves in his hair and the bridge of his nose. How auspicious, rare, lush, bizarre, kinky, transcendent, romantic. To be young, just 23, and to cradle him in my arms as we listen to the burbling water of the Fontana della Barcaccia from the open window. This is another Keats poem, and it's shorter, and then the last one is very short, and it's for Jennifer. High romance. And then Keats' ghost found that he could no longer love Fanny Braun. Fanny Braun was his love. He'd escaped the body like a love letter from its envelope, and he'd flown like a love letter in a windstorm. He'd seen that the words formed from ink melted in the rain. Words, he now knew, and he'd once been such a devotee, didn't matter, or didn't matter so much as he believed they mattered. Something mattered, he knew, but whatever it was, he couldn't put words to it, or he didn't have the heart to put words to it. He did feel love, but it was an arrow without a target. It was diffuse, like an atomized perfume, or stars as the poor see them who cannot afford glasses. He saw that Fanny, as she was known, was a concept, just as he had been a concept. They each inhabited the same amount of space, like a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of lard. In a book, they would each occupy a single page, their brains encased in cranial bones and flesh and heads of hair could each rest on a single silk pillow. Ideas, he found, don't die. Even notions fly like cottonwood seeds through the air. And love had been a notion. He saw that Fanny in time would slip free of herself. Everything does in time, even roses, even stones, foothills, fleas, and poems. Rhyme, he saw, existed on its own behalf. He could catch it like a bird catches an air current. From above, he could see that Fanny was not trifling. Nothing from above is trifling, nor more compelling than anything else. His love for her, he saw, had been an invention of the mind. Only belief could sustain it, but he could no longer sustain belief. Now and then, he'd try it on again, love, like a fancy hat he could not afford and now appeared ludicrously over-designed. Once, his ghost managed to look at her again through the gauzy curtains that hung over her bedroom window. His gaze was too objective to find her beautiful, but objectivity itself, that was beautiful. And finally, for Jennifer, romantic poet. You would not have loved him, my friend, the scholar decried. He brushed his teeth, if at all, with salt. He lied and rarely washed his hair, wiped his ass with leaves or with his hand. The top of his head would have barely reached your tits. His pits reeked, as did his deathbed. But the nightingale, I said. That's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Diane Seuss, Frank's sonnets, and the forthcoming modern poetry. And just thank you both. Thanks to these two amazing poets, Jennifer Franklin and Diane Seuss. Please check out the link in the chat box to purchase their books from bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash. Thanks to Rosalinda Monroy for tech. Go to poetryflash.org and sign up for our mailing list to get notices about our future events. And thanks so much. Thank you all for joining us today. Really, thank you, thank you, thank you.